Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Remember to subscribe to our free podcast so you won't miss any of our illuminating content. Here is episode 171.
I find that one of the most debilitating things in the life of parents is that they're just afraid. They're afraid not to do what everybody else is doing, and so they just do what everybody else is doing. Even though they know that there's something wrong, they're not exactly sure what it is.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Chris Davis. Chris has been involved in the homeschooling community for over 30 years. He's the former owner of the world's largest homeschooling company called the Elijah Company. He's the author of 2 books on education. He's been a speaker at virtually every major homeschooling conference in the U.S., Canada, Australia, and Russia. Since 2001, he's the owner of an online travel agency taking families to tours through Israel and Egypt. Welcome, Chris.
It's good to be with you.
I'm so excited to have you join us. Of course, Teresa Lodi recommended you as a marvelous mentor, but your books have been recommended on our podcast several times. So I'm more than excited to get going on all the stuff that you've written about and the things that you believe. But before we get into all that, do you want to tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Well, you pretty much covered it. I'm one of the old guys left in homeschooling, probably one of the original pioneers. We started our homeschooling early in the 1980s, and I've been involved, raised my 3 sons all the way through, began homeschooling when it was illegal in Tennessee, which I probably shouldn't have said that, but it was true. But they are all now grown and doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, which is nice to know. So I've been a pastor, I've been a business owner, and now I spend a lot of my time speaking to homeschoolers and encouraging homeschoolers and taking families to Israel and Egypt. So that's kind of what I'm doing now.
Well, and I know his bio, it was brief and short and concise, but there's so much more to your story and your journey. Do you want to go ahead and give us an idea of what that journey looked like that led you to discover what you really love to do now?
Well, it was pretty much trial and error, which I think is kind of unfortunate, but is pretty much the norm. I'll go ahead and answer another question that you had asked me earlier before we started this, and that is, what did my educational journey look like, and how did I discover what I really love to do? And my educational journey sort of led me to what I have ended up doing, because when I was going through school, I was one of those people who really hated school. School was not working for me. There are a lot of students who go to school, they do really well, they're compliant, they love to learn just about anything, and I was not a very good student, and it showed. However, there were some things as I was growing up that would have been obvious, that were strengths, that were giftings, whatever you want to call them, that if somebody had been paying attention, they could have said, wait a minute, I see something budding here. And that's, of course, one of my main thrusts when I talk to families about homeschooling, is that God has put in each one of us certain giftings and callings, if you will, just to use some religious terms, and we're different. And one of the things that public school simply doesn't have the time or the energy or the resources to do is to find out what those are and treat each individual uniquely as a unique person. Unfortunately, public school is dealing with financial restrictions, and so everybody has to be treated like a generic human being. But as I was growing up, there were certain things that I really enjoyed doing. I didn't care about reading, but I enjoyed writing. And I liked science. I liked to speak publicly. And that carried its way all the way through college. But nobody was really ever paying attention to say, okay, what we need to do is give you some space in this particular area, because this is obviously something that you really love doing, And so we'll just assume that God has put this in you, and we're going to give you some time, some space, some resources to become really good at what is obviously going on in you. And that wasn't happening. And I think that's pretty common with most young people, with most children. But it really took me years and years to figure out that I enjoyed doing certain things, and pretty much gave myself the permission, I suppose, to go ahead and prioritize those things. I mean, I went into business right out of college. That was not who I was. I went into business again after I left the pastorate. That's not who I was. I mean, it was great meeting people and traveling the country and raising my sons as we traveled the country. But I'm not a businessman, and that became pretty evident after several years. What my love is to share insights with people and to help them to have permission to do what it is that they have in their hearts to do but are afraid to do. I find that one of the most debilitating things in the life of parents is that they're just afraid. They're afraid not to do what everybody else is doing, and so they just do what everybody else is doing, even though they know that there's something wrong. They're not exactly sure what it is. So I come along and basically give them permission to do what they really know they should be doing.
Well, and sometimes that permission's all that we need, correct? I mean, I know with me in particular, if I feel like I'm not following what I was brought up with, I feel like, well, I'm not doing it correctly. But that permission is actually, it helps, like you said, that, God has a calling for each of us, and that we have a mission that we need to do on this life. We should know best of how to raise those children, because they've been given to us. And so if we feel an inclination, maybe follow that. With all of your mentoring that you've done for other families, how do you feel like your paradigm and your educational philosophy kind of changed over time and with experience?
Well, of course, when we started homeschooling way back in the 80s, nobody was doing it. And so we were sort of the first wave of people, and the only thing that we knew to do was what had been done to us. So we turned to the public school model, which was put your children in a grade, use certain curriculum, do certain subjects when they're supposed to be done in the appropriate grade. Pretty early on, we decided that really was something we didn't like when we were growing up. So why should we do something that we didn't like? It was sort of being force-fed on us, so we decided that there had to be a completely different way to educate children. So we began to give ourselves permission to say, is it possible, for instance, for children not to be in a grade at all, and for them to just grow up and learn in the context of growing up? And we knew that there were certain things that every child should know by the time they became adults. Certain basic academic skills they needed, certain relational skills they needed, certain practical skills that they needed by the time they became adults. But did that have to be worked through like the traditional public school, or could we just grow up together? And so we stopped having our children in a grade. We stopped using curriculum, and pretty much we decided, okay, what were the things that we learned in public school that we're really glad we learned? And we need to be sure that we continue with that they're necessary. Then what are the things that we were required to learn that were really a waste of time, or that would have been learned just in the context of growing up? And then what are the things that we weren't taught, but that we really wish we had been taught? And we needed to be sure that those things were a part of our children's education. So that's kind of how we sort of morphed into a whole lot more laid-back way of education, but at the same time being intentional, and being very intentional as far as each one of our sons was concerned, based on what God was showing us He had gifted them to do.
Oh, that's great. And does that include, some of that philosophy include like what the child really loves to do too? I mean, you take that into consideration as well. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's one of the main reasons, one of the main ways that God shows you what He's done with this person. Like my oldest son, he had a love of computers even when he was, we're talking about 25 years ago. When the internet was just coming on, he fell in love with computers, and, he wanted his foreign language to be computer languages. Well, that wasn't acceptable. colleges were not allowing that to be the computer language to be the foreign language that a child could learn. But I decided that it was just fine. And so that's what he did. He learned all the computer languages and even taught a college course when he was 15.
Wow.
So he now is 35 years old, and he's a very successful programmer. But that is just one example, I suppose, of how you pay attention to your children. And as you pay attention to your children, God shows you what he's done with each child. These are not our children. These are God's children. And he wants us to raise them according to his purpose. And if we say, okay, I'm just the parent here, and I'm going to parent this child according to what God wants out of this child by the time the child leaves home. And if we don't do that, then we just start off with saying, well, this is my son, and I'm going to educate this child according to the way the public school would educate the child. That's not paying at all attention to what the father of this child has intended.
That's definitely for sure. And then a lot of times we end up messing up that mission that they may come with because we're not listening. So let's kind of start off with the first thing. And I guess that the first thing that you did was that the Elijah Company. The
Elijah Company started off like when people were beginning to homeschool, like we were beginning to homeschool. There wasn't anything that we could buy. Curriculum was not available to us. And even the large curriculum publishing companies today, like Becca and Bob Jones and those kinds of people, wouldn't sell to us because we weren't a school. They only sold to schools. So even though homeschooling is a large part of their market today, they wouldn't even consider selling to us. So we had to pretty much either write our own stuff or go to the library and get it out of the library. There was a company called Lifetime Books and Gifts, which was begun by Bob and Tina Farewell in Florida. They started a little homeschool bookstore about 2 months before we started the Elijah Company, and we were friends with them. And they started homeschooling at the same time we did. So we were finding these materials in the library, and we began to publish some of them because several of them were out of print. And people would say to us, well, what are you using? And we said, well, we're using such and such, and we've just published this book that we found that we really like. So that's how we started selling materials. And then we started selling materials that we discovered, that we used, that we liked, and of course ignoring things that we had to discard because they weren't using. So that's how the Elijah Company began. We began with one book, and then we had 2 books. The first 2 we published ourselves. And then we pretty much started going to homeschool book fairs, homeschool curriculum fairs, conferences, and taking the books with us and selling them there and speaking at these conferences. So that's kind of how the Elijah Company got started.
That's great. And do you want to go ahead and also tell us about the books that you have on education and kind of what they're about? I know, like I said at the intro at the beginning of the podcast, that people have recommended them, but go into a little more detail and how those books kind of came about.
Okay, the first book was called I Saw the Angel in the Marble. And when we would write our catalog for the Elijah Company, we always included a lot of articles. And there are people who still tell me that they hold on to their Elijah Company catalogs because of all the articles that are in them. At one point, we had so many articles that I thought, well, I'm just going to take all these articles and compile them into a book. And so that's how I Saw the Angel in the Marble got published. Now, the title of I Saw the Angel in the Marble comes from a quote by Michelangelo. And Michelangelo had, he was a famous sculptor. And at one point, he sculpted this beautiful angel out of a block of marble. And he just ordered a block of marble, and he would look at this block of marble until he saw what was in it, so to speak. And then he would simply remove everything that wasn't what he saw inside of it. And in this particular case, it was this beautiful angel. And someone asked him, how in the world could you have carved this marvelous creature out of this block of marble? And he said, oh, well, I just saw the angel in the marble, and I carved until I set him free. And when I read that, I thought, well, that's really what we're doing with our children, is we're removing the extraneous that keeps them from becoming who it is that God has created them to be. So that's how that book came into being. Anyway, as I began to speak, and particularly in the last several years, began to write articles and write my blog on education, I realized that the thing that is missing one of the things that's missing in raising our children is a realization, as I've said, of who God has made this child to become. And so I believe that every human being is gifted. And when I say gifted, I don't mean gifted as opposed to not gifted. I mean, God has put giftings and talents and callings and purposes in the life of every person. And I believe that it's up to parents to discover what that is. The person should not have to figure that out when he or she's an adult. But the name of the second book, the title of the second book is called Gifted, Raising Children Intentionally. And that's really what I mean is every child is gifted, and we need to raise our children intentionally for the purpose of that child becoming really good at what God has gifted him to do. And in turn, that gives God glory, and it gives the person a love of life and a love for doing what it is God's called him to do. It's just that simple.
Totally agree with that. I love the idea of the Michelangelo. I've been to the museum that they have several carvings where, you can see the character still trapped in the marble, yeah. And it's pretty intense to look at that and to say, wow, I mean, you really can see the image there and how it's trapped in there until we help get it out. And so those are great. And you do have a blog, that you still even keep up on. What is it? Homeschoolwisdom.com?
Homeschooling Wisdom?
Homeschoolingwisdom.com. Okay, so homeschoolingwisdom.com. Do you want to tell us maybe what people could find there if they go to that site?
Well, if you want to read my blog, homeschoolingwisdom.com. And I have been writing from time to time. I don't do it all the time, but from time to time I've written sort of my philosophy of education. And you can go back through several years of my writings. And that's pretty much what I put on homeschoolingwisdom.com is just my blog and my thoughts. So anybody who's got time or inclination. And you can get either one of the books that I've written on Amazon.
Yeah, and I've linked them several times before, so I know that. And I'll definitely link them again as we've talked about them. Do you want to maybe tell us a little bit how you've gotten into what you're doing now with traveling? How did that come about?
Well, it's interesting because back in the early days of homeschooling, we all studied ancient history. And the way we studied ancient history was we started off with ancient Egypt, and then we did the Old Testament. And, we went down through the different historical periods. But my philosophy of education is if you can create a context where the context itself educates, then you can avoid just reading a book or reading a textbook. And so I thought, okay, well, if we're going to study ancient Egypt, for instance, why study ancient Egypt out of a book? Why not go to Egypt and study Egypt there? And if we're going to study the Bible, why not go to the place where the Bible happened? And so that's why I started Homeschool Travel. Homeschool Travel started off in the year 2001, and I started taking homeschooling families from all over the world to Egypt and Israel. And then it became popular enough that friends of homeschoolers began to travel with me to these places. And so I changed it from homeschool travel to experiencing Israel, because Israel became the real focus of our travels. And so the website now is experiencing, with an ing, experiencingisrael.com. And I've been taking families and couples and individuals to Israel for 15 years now. My whole concept, again, is create a context rather than buy a book.
And in my experience, when you create the context, then the books become exciting and real. If they want to study up on it later or even before they go or whatever. And it does make a difference in how much they absorb that information and then retain it too. Things that that stick with them. With all of the things that you've done, you mentioned at the very beginning that you homeschooled even before it was illegal. What do you say was the biggest obstacles that you faced, and what did you learn from those struggles?
I guess the biggest obstacle was not having a clue what I was doing. and I think that's
an obstacle, but a blessing, right?
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, fear is the biggest obstacle to anything that you're doing. If you take on the responsibility of raising your own children, and homeschooling to me is a part of raising, it's a subset of raising your children. educating them is a subset of raising your children. And of course, everybody sends their kids to public school because there are experts who know how to teach children. Then you decide that you're going to do it, and you think, wait a minute, I don't know what I'm doing. And it becomes a situation where you start making decisions based on fear. And anytime that you make a decision based on fear, you start down a road that is not easy to get off of, and it's not a good place to be. One of the most obvious things when people begin homeschooling is because they don't know what to do, they just replicate the public school in their home, which is a real mistake. It's okay if your children are really young, or it's okay for a year or two when you just need a sense of security, but you need to get off of that pretty quickly, because the public school cannot prioritize the individual. And that's why your children are home, so that you can focus on what God has done in this child and raise this child for God's purposes. So fear is the number one problem really in any endeavor. It's much broader than just homeschooling.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, for following your faith, right? I mean, the thing that stops us is that fear. Well, and with the fear too, I mean, how do you get over the fear, I guess, when you're trying to get yourself off the conveyor belt of the public school system, out of that mindset? I mean, that's why I started this podcast, is because I wanted to help lead people through that paradigm a little more quickly. But what would your advice be on doing that?
Oh, it's really pretty simple. The first thing that you do is you ask your children's father. I don't mean their dad, I mean their father. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. You ask your children's father, in what areas am I functioning out of fear? What am I doing that is a result of my being afraid not to do something else? And he will show you that. I mean, it's just that simple. He'll begin to show you areas in which you're doing something that is actually not good for your kid or for your children, but because it's not being led by the Spirit of God. And then you just say, okay, well, I am going to launch out into the uncharted territory of faith, and I'm going to stop doing what I've been doing because I'm afraid. And I'll give you one of my favorite examples, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. Go right ahead.
My oldest son, we were going through a textbook on math. And it was a Saxon book. Some of you were not going to be familiar with this, but Saxon was the gold standard for math many years ago when he was young. And he was in a book, Saxon 5-4, which is a fifth grade book, fourth grade book. And he came to me one day and he said, I hate this. I hate math. Now, I knew that God did not create us to hate learning. So there was something that I didn't understand. So I said, well, you put the book on the shelf, and I'm going to go ask your father what the problem is here. Now, whenever I referenced his father, he knew I was not talking about myself. So I went and I asked the Lord. I said, my son says he hates math. What's the deal here? And I'm not going to, I want to do what's right. I want to do what you want me to do with him. I think he needs to learn math. I didn't hear anything. And a month later, I was still asking. And 2 months later, I was still asking. 6 months later, I was still asking. I'm a pretty stubborn person. And I said, Father, I'm not going to do any math until you tell me what is going on here. I'm not just going to do math because I'm afraid he's not going to learn math. You need to talk to me about this math thing. I'm really concerned. And a year later, nothing. And I finally said, okay, forget math. We're never going to do math. So there. And a couple of weeks later, I was at a friend's house, and the daughter was talking about how much she loved this particular algebra program. Oh, this algebra program is so wonderful. And I said, yeah, but that's not really my issue, because my son is like fourth, fifth grade math. She said, yeah, well, I just thought I would mention it. So anyway, I was driving home from their house, and I thought, this is the first time in a year I've heard anything about math. And I'm just going to buy this algebra program. So I bought it, and I handed it to my son. And I said, you're probably not going to get anything out of this, but just take a look at this book. And, we might sell it in our Elijah Company catalog. Just tell me what you think. Well, he went right through the book, never asked a question, aced the final exam. And this same author wrote a geometry book. And so I bought it, and I gave it to him. And he went right through it, read the whole thing, aced the final exam. And I thought, I'm sure there's a lesson in here I'm supposed to know, but it intrigued me to know that God really will tell us what's going on if we just let him be the father and we be the parent.
Before we go on, let's listen to this message. Recently, the Luminous Mind became an affiliate for EduSense, which offers tremendous discounts on educational supplies. I personally use EduSense to purchase our family supplies because of their great prices, responsive shipping times, and best of all, the chance to earn EduBucks, which I use towards future purchases. Who doesn't love a great deal within a deal? To get a 90% savings on your EduSense materials, go to theluminousmind.net and click on the sponsor page to find the affiliate link. Start using EduSense to illuminate your educational experience. Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Chris Davis, who's helping to give generations of parents courage. Well, I kind of wonder too, speaking like that, using the verbiage that you do, has that really helped create a good relationship with your kids because they know that, it's not just you forcing them, that maybe you're being inspired and you understand, the whole dimension of the relationship is much more different and special than just, you as a dad just telling your kids what to do. I'm just curious for my own.
Yeah. Well, it has. If you think in terms of the public school will tell you what to do. The public school will tell the child what to do if he's in public school. If we're homeschooling and following the public school model, then it's the public school who's really telling our children what to do. We're just sort of an intermediary making them do it. But if the child understands that your basic interest is to discover what God has put in them to do in life, and you really want to give them the space and the time and the resources to become awesome at that, then it's a different kind of thing. I once had a daughter tell me, or I once had a mother tell me, all my daughter wants to do is write. I can't get her to do anything. All she wants to do is write. And she was disgusted. The mother was disgusted with this. Well, the daughter, when she heard the mother say that to me, the daughter was absolutely floored. Like, my mom knows this, and it's never been important to her. And I thought, how sad that is. I know hundreds of parents who would love to have a child who loves to write.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's because the daughter wasn't doing what the parent wanted the daughter to do, which was basically a reflection of the public education. So, yeah, I think it really does make a difference.
Yeah, she was letting that fear, kind of going back to our obstacle, the fear kind of get in the way with the relationship with the daughter in a way too. Because,
absolutely.
Yeah.
You'll see parents who want to read to their child. Their child wants to play Legos on the floor. So the parent wants the child to sit in next to her on the couch while she's reading. Come and sit next to me. Oh, Mom, I want to play with my Legos. And it becomes like a battle.
Yeah.
Why not let the child play Legos while you read to him?
Yeah. Well, and the movement helps them absorb stuff from what I've learned. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Well, tell us, we talked about obstacles that we face. Tell us maybe some successes that you've seen and, how you've been really edified by those, I guess.
I think probably my greatest success has been just to believe that God is who he is and that he actually is in charge, and that if you act like he's in charge, and if you act like he is involved, which he is, then he actually will be involved. The more that we can step back and allow him to raise our children, the better it is for everybody, the less tension there is. And so I think probably coming to the place, I guess, where I've actually believed that God is who he says he is, and giving him the opportunity to be involved. It's really amazing. There's a story in the book of Judges where a woman is out in the field and an angel comes to her and says, and she's been barren for years. An angel comes to her and says, you're going to have a son. And of course, she's all thrilled, and she goes and she runs and tells her husband. And he says, well, the angel needs to come and tell us both. So the angel comes and tells the husband, it's just true. Your wife's going to have a son. And so the husband asks two very important questions. The first question he asks the angel is, what is the purpose of this boy's life going to be? And the second question he asks, what is our responsibility to make sure that purpose actually happens? And I think those are two questions very, very few parents ever think to ask. But these are the parents of Samson. And, we may think that Samson was a pretty crazy dude, and he was. But those two questions are really, really critical. And if you really believe that God will answer them, then you're on a path for your child's success.
Yeah. Well, and I loved in your story how you talked about going to God and asking him questions. I think that God he respects us enough to, not force his will upon us. And he loves it when we ask questions, and he's willing to, answer those, but he needs us to ask it, to ask those questions of who is this child and what is his mission and how can I help that? Just very powerful messages there. What do you feel like, speaking of the success that we just finished, what do you feel like maybe some great personal habits are that you have had or cultivated that helped you be successful?
Well, it's interesting that you use the word habits because just a couple of days ago, I was listening to a webinar by Michael Hyatt. I don't know if you know Michael Hyatt.
Yeah, but, I was probably listening to the same one.
Okay. But anyway, he starts off by saying, everybody talks about diligence and everybody talks about passion and everybody talks about this and that as far as being the success in business. But he said, in my opinion, the most important thing to being a success is the habits that you establish. And he said, for instance, when I wake up in the morning, I don't do anything electronic. I don't look at my phone. I don't look at the computer for at least an hour. And he said, that really sets the tone for my day. And I agree with that. I think habits, someone told me years ago that if you want to establish a habit, or if you want to break a habit, if you want to change a habit, you do something for 6 months every day, and then you can't not do it. Like, for instance, if you get up and you don't make up your bed, then you think, I need to make my bed. But if you got up and made your bed every morning for 6 months, you couldn't get up and not make your bed because it's a habit that you form. And pretty much we need to decide what habits help us and what habits take us in directions that we don't want to go. And in this electronic age where everybody needs to look at their phone and everybody needs to go to Facebook right away or see who's messaged them, I made a decision that I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to let electronics get in front of my time when I'm just meditating or praying or reading the Word. So habits are extremely important. I don't know, habits in relating to your children, habits in relating to your spouse. You just need to decide which habits are life-giving, and then if you do them consistently, they will become something that you can't not do. Yeah.
Well, and the habits that we have as parents will reflect on maybe the habits that our kids pick up down the road too. They're so vital to really watch, what our daily actions are, consistent daily actions. And then, like you said, either decide if that's the path we want to set. So when you talked about, not looking at electronics and different things for, help or advice or whatever, but let's talk about maybe books that you feel have been really influential. He has a great website that you can go and actually get resources. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the Elijah Company catalog, when we closed the Elijah Company, the catalog was still something that was really popular. So what I did was I just simply took the catalog and put online pretty much everything that was in the catalog. And so the website's called chrisdavisrecommends.com. And if anyone is interested in knowing what I recommend for homeschooling, you can go to that website. Books that have been meaningful to me, just, of course, Scripture has been very, very important to me all my life. And one of my mentors is John Taylor Gatto. John Gatto, many people have never heard of John Gatto, but John, for 30 years, he was a public school teacher in New York City. And several times he was awarded the New York City Teacher of the Year. When he was awarded the New York State Teacher of the Year, after 30 years of teaching, he gave a speech to all the assembled dignitaries, which basically ended his career, because he talked about how damaging public school was to children. And he became a real major advocate for homeschooling until his health failed. He used to speak at several homeschooling conferences, and he also wrote the preface to my first book. So he's been a real blessing. He wrote the book Dumbing Us Down. A lot. He's written a number of books, any of which would be beneficial to a homeschooling parent.
Yeah, lots of great information, and that kind of helps you get over the fear that you have to read some of his books. So, well, and let's talk about mentoring. You know, you've been mentored, and then you are. I mean, I'm interviewing you now because you were a mentor to Teresa Lodi, who was on our podcast as well. Let's kind of talk about that and how mentoring has made a significant difference in your life.
You mean mentoring others?
Yeah, either mentoring others or the mentorship that you've received.
Well, I never have really thought in terms that I was mentoring people. I was just sharing what I have learned and trying to give people, as I said earlier, trying to give people the courage to do what they know, what they really want to do, what they know that they should be doing. And that's been probably the thing that has blessed me the most over the years, is when people say to me, you've just given me courage to do something that I've always known I should be doing. And that, to me, that's my greatest blessing. I still speak occasionally at homeschooling conferences, although I spend most of my summers in Israel now, and that's during the homeschool conference season. But I really enjoy speaking. I guess my book, Gifted, is a way that I can help mentor people.
Yeah, and continually mentor people for sure. So, well, and let's kind of talk about like how your mentorship is leaving a legacy. You know, if you could leave a legacy, what would it be?
If I could leave a legacy, I guess in two areas, really. One legacy would be to leave some young people, some children who are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, what God has created them to do. And I suppose another area that I would like to leave a legacy is other people changing the way that they raised or homeschooled their children so that their children are doing what they're supposed to be doing. I guess that would be another hope that I have. And then, of course, I have become involved with Israel, the nation of Israel. And that's something that happened by accident, quite by accident, but it's something that I've been asked to do. And so just beginning a program that hopefully will be something that will help the nation of Israel.
Well, and that was the one website that we've missed is tellingisraelstory.org. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, tell us what's on that.
Okay, I'm gonna try and make this brief, but it's not brief. But a few years ago, the government of Israel sent several members of the government to Washington, D.C., and they invited all of the leaders of the Christian church, Christian universities, and so forth to a 2-day conference at the embassy there in Washington, D.C. And I was not invited to go because I wasn't a Christian leader, obviously. But a friend of mine said I needed to go, and actually was the impetus for getting me there. But what these leaders did from the Israeli government was they said, we have pretty much given up trying to tell our story. Nobody believes that we're the good guy anymore. And even though we have great Nobel Prize winners and we have provided the world with great science and we rush to countries that are having devastating things happen to them, we're still becoming more and more the bad guy, and anti-Semitism is on the rise. And we've come to realize that you believers in Jesus are the only people who care. It suddenly struck me when he said that the Jewish people have never turned to the church for help. And here I am sitting there thinking, well, what am I doing in this meeting? And they said, would you help us tell our story? And I thought, well, the only people I know are homeschoolers. And so I just put it on the back burner. But my next time in Israel, I was meeting with a rabbi who has, over the years, he has met with my groups. And all these homeschooling students, and he talks to them about Judaism and about Christianity. Anyway, he didn't know anything about this meeting in Washington, D.C., but he took me aside and he said, he said, I've been meeting with your homeschoolers for years now, and he said, I've come to realize that they are the future opinion leaders in their various countries. They're just different. And I want you to create a situation where you can scholarship bringing them over here, and we'll put them before the military and before the government. They'll travel to important places in the land, and they'll learn what's really going on here. And then we'll task them to return to their locations and their universities and work against the rising anti-Semitism. Anyway, we started an organization called Telling Israel's Story, and we're in the process of raising the money to scholarship homeschool students to go to Israel and spend 20 days and really learn how to combat anti-Semitism that's growing like wildfire all over the world. That is short version.
Well, in Telling Israel's Story, it sounds like it's definitely more than just a website to go to, that there's an opportunity there for young people, correct?
Well, we are redoing the website because it's really, what I just told you is not something that's public yet. We put the website up just sort of as a placeholder. But the idea will be, once we're able to say we're ready for you homeschool students to tell us you're interested, then what we'll do is we'll vet them and try and figure out how to decide who we should choose. We're going to choose 15, only 15 for the first trip.
Wow.
We know that some parents will want to go, and we don't want to take more than 20 people. But once I'm actually able to tell everybody about this, what I just told you, then I think we'll probably get a lot of people interested, especially since it's a scholarship trip. I mean, it's basically a free 20 days in Israel. The only thing the students will have to pay for is getting to New York, getting to the Gateway Airport.
Wow,
but they're going to have to prepare. They're going to have to show us that they're serious about doing this. They're not just taking a trip to Israel, and that they're serious about doing something when they return. They're going to be ambassadors for the state of Israel, and they have to be prepared to do that. So it's going to be pretty serious, but also very exciting.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Well, and I feel privileged that we were one of the first people to find out about that. That's great. Yeah. Before we say goodbye, do you have any final parting words of advice that you would like to share with our listeners? And then we've given out a number of contact information, but let's reiterate that so people know where to find you.
Okay, parting words. My parting words are: believe in God. Believe that He gave you these children, and they're not yours. These are not your children. These are His children, and you are responsible for parenting them for a season. You'll always have a relationship with them, hopefully, but they're only going to be under your care for a season, and that season is extremely critical that you find out what God wants you to do with these children. And He will tell you, and very few people ask, but He will tell you if you do.
Yeah, definitely has the answers for that. And your contact information?
If anybody wants to contact me on the website, all of my contact information is on any of the websites. ExperiencingIsrael.com if you want to go to Israel with me. We have 2 trips next year, and we do have some openings on both of our trips. If you want to bring a group yourself, I can pay your way. If you can put together a group of 15 paying people, I'll pay your way. But that's all on the website, ExperiencingIsrael.com. And then, of course, homeschoolingwisdom.com for my blog. Chris Davis recommends for my recommendations. And we won't talk about Telling Israel's Story right now, because that's something that we're trying to raise $150,000. Once we get that, we can come out of the chute with it.
Yeah, great. Well, I am so appreciative of your time, Chris. Like I said, you've been recommended to me several times, and your books have been on the list of things that people should read. I especially wanted to thank you for really helping parents understand that our children are gifted, regardless of whatever deficiencies that we may see, that they're gifted in some way, and that if we just ask the questions to their maker, then we will find the answers. I really appreciate that That's encouraging language. So thank you. And once again, his websites are experiencingisrael.com. He's got homeschoolwisdom.com where homeschoolingwisdom.com where you can find all kinds of wonderful writings that maybe will help give us the courage to do what we're supposed to do. Chris Davis recommends.com for great resources, and then tellingisraelstory.org. We definitely want to keep an eye on that. Yeah. But we will be sure to link all that information up that we discussed on our website as well. But thank you once again so much for coming on, Chris, and joining us, helping to light our minds on fire. I really appreciate it.
Well, I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Chris Davis, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and get our new monthly newsletter. Then check out the Services tab to see how we can continue to assist you, our fire starters. Also, to help us continue production of illuminating content, go to the Sponsor tab at theluminousmind.net for more information on sponsorship and affiliate programs. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, and now Instagram. Get our free audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider these easy ways. Tell your friends about us, leave us a review, share our content. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.